Spirit to ask for your guidance and understanding, and that you would lead us into truth. Amen. Okay, so I'm really going to go a different approach here. I've got a lot of material. We'll see what I get through. I'm not really doing a teaching. These are things I'm just like processing. It's written sort of matter of fact on some of these things, but it's building an argument. But I very well may revise this and change these things. There's been a lot to process. So, yeah, if you've been one who's gotten out of a system, and you've had a pretty good connection to revelation and source and things like that, you may find that this information comes like a flood, but you've got to discern that. So it's making up for the past time, maybe. So this first part of it, I just want to talk about just for a minute here. I'm not really going to talk about food or any that kind of thing, but it's really interesting that there's 3 different sections at least where we're talking about it's having to do with covenant or with what to do, what not to do, and it relates, sort of fellowship and darkness. And there's so many of these verses I think for over 2,000 years, the enemy has strategically created systems aimed at these verses, right? Because it's very much like a lawyer type system, right? The way that the demonic and sort of works here, the way that the Jezebelic spirits work. They tempt you and then accuse you to disqualify you, and then they want to reroute your energy and spiritual covering and things like that would happen from a contract or a covenant or things like that into more black magic, into the next person that they go after or whatever. It's and with some of the narcissistic systems in the way that they sort of get people of the light spun out on them, a lot of times it is because they're trying to extract that emotional energy and create these links, these obsession things that they're able to carry spiritual significance, right? So their whole thing is what is it like? As above, so below, or something like that. It's like we pray on earth as it is in heaven. Everything like that is like a little bit of an inverse, but they're aimed at sort of exploiting us and creating. They're kind of manufacturing consent a lot of times, or maximizing ignorance, and all of what the church has done. God has actually sent the church strong delusion, and people, me at times, lots of times, if you did not love truth. So loving truth is loving Scripture. And of course, there's contextual things, and we're being led by the Spirit, right? We're not under the law, and yet, I do believe the Spirit is talking about some of these things, because some of these things kind of seem impossible. It's like, what fellowship does light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? And so it's like, what Babylon has become, or what the American church has become, because of sensationalism, which was just kind of it's really made following God very difficult. If you don't believe in the Spirit, how do you follow God? It's just like whatever you do is right, I guess, or just I didn't know that, or whatever. And so there's these things it turns out are really kind of important. So and so I think a lot of social media harvesting and data harvesting is a spiritual consequence, because the Babylon system has been using that to try to find out who has had more, to build profiles on people that maybe should be targeted, and then those targeted people, they've created things around them, or maybe it's depending on how far back this thing would have gone, but using psychics to look into the Akashic records or the Lord's Book of Deeds and things like that to try to find ones that would be a hindrance to doing what I'm doing now, or that would do what I'm doing now, which would be a hindrance to them, kind of thing, and which is to point out these things that are kind of obvious, but it's the reversal of what someone thinks that the Lord has done. The Lord blinds the minds of the unbelievers to His ways and His beauty, and that it would be wildly in their best interest to pursue Him. And so, the converse of that is that Babylon, the mystery of Babylon, which is in part of this is a mystery as well, right? Because it's some of these things were historically one context, and so it's by the Spirit that we're seeking to extract out those same elements to the end times, right? And that's in Matthew 24. It's all these like end time events that have been fulfilled in different ways, that are the pointing to like, how do you know when it's the end times? And those have been fulfilled. That now it's like we're near a time potentially where some these things could be started. There's a sequence, there's an order. A lot of times there's a spiritual reality that happens though before the physical, and I think that's part of the trap. What Jesus says there is, let the reader understand, because in Matthew 24 it seems like he's talking about something historical, and yet he says that, and then suddenly he does kind of what Isaiah would do a lot, which is like be talking about something like that's happening currently or soon in that generation, and then jump to the end time, jump to 2020, or 2030 or 40 or whatever, just it could be different on different timelines, and then it's like it's a type and a shadow. There's a partial fulfillment here, but an ultimate one in the end times or in the millennial kingdom in the age to come. Okay, if that didn't make a lot of sense, that's okay. We'll get into that stuff later. But just to point out though that like we're extracting these things. Okay, so this is something to pray about here, and about food is a form of fellowship. But the sharing of a meal is a sign of covenant and agreement. And I know I have in biblical times. When did that change? I mean, we could say, well, that's a Jewish culture thing or whatever like that. But like, I feel like I know that witches still abide by this, and they still start to do these things like that. And so that's where discernment is sort of needed. So he just wouldn't have taken the risk, I don't think, that consuming certain food could be an entry point for certain things. However, he would have the discernment, and if you're a chosen one, the warfare has been on intuition, discernment, the eyes of our understanding enlightened. Those, they haven't targeted the New Age like they did the chosen ones, right? Or the called ones, the chosen ones, the Christians. And so there's an element of those who are in between, that are kind of between two worlds, who are benefiting from this, and I think that's been part of the sort of call here. I'm not trying to qualify myself or anything like that, but there's been a lot of effort to discern how and when this would be sort of unpacked, some of these things. And so that's like my conviction for this, I guess, is what I'm saying, is that they're coming from a certain, like a place of confirmation in some places, and then, but like to a certain degree, still, processing all of this and putting things together, and it's definitely building on itself, right? Okay. Revelation 17 and 18 is the mystery of the harlot Babylon. Things are sealed in the book of Revelation for this very reason, because the other stuff I was just talking about that's unsealed, 2,000 years of the devil perfecting a way to make it hard for us to do those things. Relatively hard, right? Compared to the church in China and things like that. And they've actually put a model on some things about how to get around, navigate some of these elements. But again, we're talking about all the nations being deceived by the sorcery. It's quite possible that there was some kind of karmic exchange, and I use it from karmic in a Galatians 6:8 kind of way, where we're taking the oil of Babylon and Iraq, and then some part of their prophetic destiny and some sort of like balancing, where Americans kind of became this big exporter of Babylon, when it was supposed to be, this message of, it's interesting what our history actually was. So regardless, there's been some reaping and sowing, and that it is kind of like the Esau and Jacob thing. Genesis, the book of Genesis, is not just cool stories that people tell, although that's, if your mind is blinded to that, it's what it kind of seems like, and that's the entry point. But truly, it matches a lot of what happens to people of the light sometimes, and a lot of these realities, and they're highlighting spiritual realities and understanding that the world is kind of a matrix in a sense, and like if you think of it as like a 3D hologram in a kind of way, like I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying that's really popular right now, because that's it's a great vehicle into understanding why prayers and decrees work and what your role is in terms of shaping your reality as a believer. And again, that's been kind of hijacked by the New Age. And that's sort of the point, is that there is, like, some of you are waking up from a matrix and then going right back into a new one. That's a counterfeit version of the one that's yet to come. So the spirit of Elijah, John the Baptist, prepares the way for Jesus' first return. That same spirit is on a collective people. This Isaiah 40 calling out of these people, these collective John the Baptists. Sort of, I mean, it's kind of John the Baptist. It's Elijah. There's a lot of different strands and elements and callings within this. But in the early days of still preparing people for the return of the Lord and preparing the bride and mourning for the bridegroom, if you don't understand it, don't worry, where there is a bold declaration and unveiling kind of thing, and it's about freeing the captives. It's a big part of this, right? Setting the captives free. But it's the Melchizedek priesthood, it's the book of Hebrews, and it's intercession based. It's a spiritual war. And so we're talking about the days of Noah, so will be the coming of Jesus' return, right? So it had never rained before. That's the big quote about that. And so what is it about what we're going through? It had never gone through before, or it had never been revealed to us before. It might be another way to kind of think of it. And so we see some of these governmental things, the MK Ultra programs. There's a lot that was done with Laurel Canyon in terms of accessing portals and information. And we'll get into some kind of building on that a little bit. But there's this Babylon is really, really powerful. But like, you're so much more powerful once you take your power back, right? Because we're talking about these covenantal meetings with unbelievers and getting yoked and contracts to them, and the places where it's like your yes is yes and no is no, or you're relying on these systems and things like that. Again, sometimes that was by design, perhaps other times it was just coercive control and oppression and whatever it is. But it's an intentional trying to delay they may have wanted to completely just steal your scroll. And we've talked about that a ton on here. But there's just a lot of occultic abuses that have been really trying to, and different cults and groups and like that, and way more people are involved in these kind of things than you would even think. That's the other part of that, the whole conspiracy theory, secret society thing. It's just the people who just, like, the Tower of Babel is built on those who have been born into families or bloodlines or cult covens, secret societies, all these different offshoots. They're all just driven by the demonic. We don't war against people, we war against flesh and blood. But it's very organized. It's like organized crime, but for demons. But they don't, on the higher levels, they definitely know what they're doing. But on the lower levels, they don't always know that. And there can be also just like family things that are just like spirits that are passed down or whatever. But it's like systematic putting your fire out, and systematic getting you to dial it down and don't believe in the spirit. People who believe in that stuff, you don't really believe prayer is real, right? Meanwhile, they're like, doing witchcraft on you. But like, again, it's limiting your power. It's all this concept of I'm okay, you're not okay, and so that's where there is sort of like I'm starting off with the female here because we've done the male end part of this so much. The female part of this is like, there were these callings that get seduced away, right? And this kind of Antichrist spirit and the Luciferian spirit. And so a lot of times it is going after the feminine first. That's a lot of these things have been derailed in terms of like disrupting existing unions, because there's so much power that's given to a couple, the power couple, to a couple that's in union, right? And if something happens, the Black Widow thing, if something should happen to that male or whatever, then they're really focused on this whole next of kin thing in terms of children bloodline, but also in terms of spiritual inheritance. Because we're talking about Mystery Babylon as where this whole 1943 thing, where the Holocaust shifted into the spiritual realm, and the demonic things like that were behind that didn't just go away, but they just found more or less obvious ways to do that. And there have been elements of cooperating with technology. I mean, it's funny because like we as humans are advancing with technology, right? And we don't think the devil is or whatever. He's like, oh, we would know about it, or there'll be a law or something like that. And it's like, I always think of that scene from The Wire, like, you think the world works one way, but what if it's the other way, right? So, and again, this the technology, the occult, all these things. Your eyes will be open and be like, God has been the promise of that stuff. But they sacrifice their autonomy for power a lot of times. And there's just always negative consequences. A lot of times they're used until they're not useful anymore. Satan is the great betrayer. I didn't even say the word great there. Sarah is a great lesson there. And patience with God's promises, trying to, fulfill it in her own way through Hagar, which is like kind of like the manifestation thing without the Jezebel spirit that wants the kingdom without the king. Now I wouldn't hate to say anything bad about Sarah, because like it, obviously that wasn't as bad as some of these other things or whatever. But this is the nature of these attacks it's a spiritual law revealed, and you're getting insight on it too. Like you're supposed to, we are all supposed to explode. Maybe we should explode them too, but expose the plans of the enemy, and make these things known. So within reading and things like that. And there's, again, it's not just. You kind of want to be led of the Lord in these things, and some of the stuff is intended to go after. But like, I've not read any occult books or texts or anything like that. I'm not approaching it from that way. It's been more, just other methods, and trying to seek like a spirit of wisdom and revelation. Ephesians 1, prayer and fasting, and it's like, I think it's just time for a lot of people to just understand these kind of things, and they're confirming it by, this various means. So, anyway, the point is, what we're talking about is these spiritual laws. We want to be wise as serpents, right? So that we can be harmless as doves, and we can avoid the snares of the enemy, right? He's like a roaring lion seeking who he can devour and all that. So, if it's for you, you would know, because this is like helping you validate what you've seen or questioning what you've seen. There's a massive Jezebelic element of those that would, what they would call like messing with your solar plexus chakra or something like that. They want to find the Jenga piece of your confidence, like kind of the Delilah, and just tear that apart. And they may pretend to be a different person for the first part of the relationship, like that, or it's just the fact that we'll get to the next part. Yeah, we'll get there when we get there. All right, I want to jump ahead. So Deborah has this like pressure to hide her authority and to defer to male leadership, which is corrupted, which is like the patriarchy, and that's actually justified a lot of this Jezebel stuff here. But they've been intentionally trying to delay rightful spiritual covering or disobey certain decrees, things that have written, in our scrolls. When the Lord first makes a human, he has a dream and he builds a person around it. And so it's just like they did in the Bible. They tried to find out where the deliverers were going to come from, and then they kill off that bloodline, And so we've seen that with intentional miscarriages with the certain covens, or the different psychic readings and the stuff they do and all that. Abortion, I guess, in part. So leading Israel into righteous war doesn't perfect of divine justice, right? So we have Ruth, the covenant redeemer, where it's like spiritual law about remaining loyal to divine covenant, right? That's even over an emotional loss can reactivate a whole destiny. But the flip of that, what they've tried to do, is to try to ensnare women who have been abandoned into bitterness or bad relationships, intentional. If you read a lot about like New Agers and people that are witches, they're really into other people's relationships. Isn't that weird? You ever wonder why that is? That they're so proud of like how they like split people up or created triangulation and or just like that whole, what's the demonic spirit behind that and why or whatever. And it's that they're partnering with demonic things that want to create division and split up, especially people that are, of the light, right? So again, we're getting to like, why does light have fellowship with darkness? Though they may, again, Satan pretends to be an angel of light, they may pretend to be Christian and all that kind of stuff. So discernment is massive, it really is. So Esther, she was one that was bold in intercession, and she was crying out for other people. Massively powerful to enter into your destiny and to like really stand in the hours to come. I think your prayers, God hears your prayers, and praying for other people changes things, and you can confirm these things to the level of your power to you, and you can grow in it by getting closer to Him. But your best life now type mentality, right? I mean, which is tricky too, because they get you into a poverty spirit by like getting you not to be self-focused, when sometimes like, well, you've given me this big call, I need these resources to do it, and do I have to do it in a shack, like a shack or a hut? It came out wrong. Or like we actually should be so favored by the Lord that people are jealous of Christians. That's how it was in the Israelites, with this, that kind of divine blessing. There were certain times where there was like, for the sake of the gospel, there was homelessness, thing like that, but like it was not like necessarily in the winter or something, but it was kind of, I mean, it's a different culture too, but regardless, Matthew 24 talking about praying that your flight is not in winter. So anyway, there's you can kind of see the trend that's going here too. So idol worship is a big part of that. Other gods, things like that, right? It's temptation through social shame, scandals, smear campaigns, fear of rejection to try to get you to abort your calling or to disqualify you before you can do it. That is, I mean, it's at the point where it's like, if somebody hasn't had like early scandals, then I wonder if they are called, because they went after the ones who had the biggest callings, right? So, but hey, no, the Lord can do what He wants. So then I'm sure there are people that were hidden some kind of way, so that like they didn't get targeted, and then or they took up other calls because this person got disqualified and all that stuff. And we'll talk about that later, but that's a huge part of this, is like the intentional disqualification. They do that a lot. Okay. To try to take that person's inheritance. So this has been big. There's been some good, there was a good Taylor Welch video on this subject. I've been studying it for a while, because Matthew 5:20, like, this is massive, but like no one really believes it. It's like one of the really important things, and it's that they believe it enough to shame themselves, but not, it's just like they don't want to talk about it. But it's like, whoever looks on a woman to lust, I don't know how they got to be King James in here. Whoever looks on a woman to lust after her commits adultery with her in his heart. And so, what I submit to you, again, not teaching, just processing, like there's things that are happening, right? And there's some terms that are kind of associated with this stuff. You don't have to use these terms, whatever. It's just opening, the spiritual gates, right? We saw that with Job, where Job was just like, I took a vow not to set anything bad before my eye gates, right? So, into his soul. And so, there's the Jezebel spirits knit to witchcraft, right? Because Jezebel is knit to Babylon, which is knit to seduction, to steal a king's, what they would call manifestation power. If you're a Christian and you use your power, your spiritual inheritance, by which you have a relationship and actually knowing the Lord, and the call that you have on your life and what you're supposed to do with that power, is one thing. If they can get you to manifest the kingdom without the king, or if they can get you not to manifest because you have a poverty mindset, so you don't actually get the resources to do what you need to do, or the right people, or the housing structures, time, whatever it is, then they do that. But also, they want you to leave a lot of meat on the bone so that it'll go over to, they think that it goes to the next of kin, and so they try to. That's where a lot of the seduction stuff is, and some of the stuff is like bloodline stuff, or whatever it is. But when witches are behind some of the stuff, or there's some demons behind some of the stuff, they know what to do with this adultery of the heart kind of thing. But again, you can decree it broken and you can take your power back, but they are betting that you won't do that, right? And then even from what I can gather, there's still kind of a recovery period to get you the fullness of your light or something. But there's a massive movement in the New Age and just in the business culture of semen retention, or for women, it's just called retention. Like it's where they're understanding that there's a correlation between just what it's meant for creating another person, or versus for made for just the creating, and then also just you're really meant to not look at other people if you're in a covenant with one person. And people can say, well, that's outdated or whatever, and it's like, I mean, this is just how things work. They don't want Christians to know that, and they, and that's part of the Jezebel thing is sort of female in a sense, because, I mean, it is like, you can say, well, you're not with the times, you're behind. I'm just saying how they think it works. You know what I mean? Go after Jezebel, or these these witches that think that manifestation power is mostly male, and then they want to seduce that male, get that power, and then use it against him and for themselves. It's the it is kind of there's a black widow helmet. Not that there aren't like men that are doing these same sort of things in different ways, and that would be the energy harvesting type of thing kind of falls in. But this is where there's there's so much about the end times and being pure in heart. The pure in heart will see God. Even if you're not a virgin, being a spiritual virgin, of Matthew 24, the wise virgins, those who are in the bride. Not that might be celibacy, but that might just be like only you only have eyes for your spouse, that kind of thing. But there's a grace for this, right? And there's a the fight of faith, and there's filling your mind with scriptures, which is going to give you more power to fight these things. But staying on your path and having communion with the Lord instead of darkness, and trying to avoid these covenant binds and focus on your seed, your destiny, your timeline, and not end up on these Jezebel, Lilith, or whatever, these witchy kind of altars. Those who are not in the kingdom of light, and then therefore are vulnerable to what goes with the kingdom of darkness, right? So I have been studying this verse and trying to understand it for the longest time. Because again, there's something about sex and marriage, and it's like food and sex, or like there's something in the spirit that means something. And so the lie was, that's just Jewish culture. And it's like, well, okay, but the Jewish culture understands how the spirit works in a way that you probably don't, Gentile. So maybe take a seat. Because it's, but that, like, and I'm not going after the church, like, and that kind of thing. It's just, that's just like, we trusted the scholars for this kind of stuff. We didn't trust the spirit, and the scholars talked us out of our own inheritance, so that it would be easier to just kind of go back to sleep, just watch TV, and that's been a strategic element here. And the TV is giving you a identity that's not of God, as is the music, which is the most powerful thing ever. And so, and then the way out of this is, it's like the devil does, I'll say it this way. So God's not supposed to give you a trap, right? Unless he also gives you a way out of it. And that's a universal law, because it's scripture. It's so funny, that's like, it's universal law. Well, it's a scriptural law, and so that was what governs the law, but like the New Age won't even give God that credit. So there's like, it's just in the universal law. Well, okay, but like, how did it get there? It's like, well, okay, yeah, it's in the Bible. Something like, okay, yeah. So all of their Bibles, like, how to like twist the stuff in our Bibles or whatever. But it's like there's different offshoots, and they, different people have different things. But this is where Hitler went to the spirit on the stuff, and that the participation of demons and all these things. So, and the oaths of the cults and the covens and all that did not disclose this stuff. And then what they went after to try to get this information is wild. So they pushed this sort of false celibacy and sexuality to starve souls out and to create an appetite for things. It's a counterfeit, right? What does the devil want to do? He wants to make the world think he is God. But it's always, there's a little, it's always Christless, and to the point of like even making Christ the enemy. Because if he can get people to do that, and that like this Antichrist that will come, that he is the actual Christ. But it starts at the sort of heart level before they're really. It starts off by getting people just to say no to God and yes to something else, and that's a lot of it's just lovers of themselves and New Age we are Christ. We're all Christ consciousness, so we don't need the blood of Jesus. That was just like ridiculous. Like, you don't need, so nothing can cover your sin. So you're gonna go to heaven, and and it'll be billions of years of joy based on because you're just cool. And you weren't born under the curse of Adam and Eve. Like, you just found a way to break it or something. And it's like without the blood of Christ. It's wild. But that's kind of the lie that they've been giving, and they just didn't really think it through. Or it's, like it says, their eyes are blinded to the beauty of Christ, or the understanding of the gospel. So that's why we preach it. So this is kind of like, there's just something about fellowship and covenant and who you let into your life. It feels like, in studying this stuff, again, what they believe, it's just like accepting somebody, right, without any spiritual discernment, right? And again, it's like, that's why Christians need to have spiritual awakenings in a sense. I mean, like via God. They need to pray for Ephesians 1, their eyes of their heart to be enlightened, because if they can see in the Spirit what's driving the people that they're in covenant with, then they would pray more and get closer to God and use discernment more. And let their yes be yes, no be no, and kind of make a bigger deal about who they spend time with and listen to. Right? Because like it's intense, because it's like they're forbidding to marry over here, but they're saying to marry over here. They're don't eat these meats here. There's a lot of it's really intense. But there's a whole karmic, what they call anyways, the karmic thing of keeping people from being able to marry the person they're supposed to marry. So and then restriction and stuff like that. They try to insert themselves into certain people's bloodlines, and then sacrifice that person with whatever they do, death spells or betrayals or whatever, disqualification, smear campaigns, right? And that sometimes via a third party. They like to hide behind other people and not like own what they do. But I'll get to like how they do that in a minute. But so that's how it's like you might have somebody who is equally yoked. It doesn't even have to be a soulmate, though. They do try to stop both of those two for one. But the forbidding to marry, when the New Age, there's like, there's all this effort and spell work trying to keep these two people apart, or to try to keep this person with somebody who's doing witchcraft, and it's just like, because God didn't join that together, and these people were forbidding it to marry via this Babylon mystery system, to go after certain the Cain spirit that like kills Abel, and it's meant to sacrifice, and pleasing the Lord, and the inheritance that Abel would get. He would get manifestation of power in a sense by the sacrifice, because they didn't have Christ yet. They were still sacrificing the animals. Well, these people still sacrifice because they don't want Christ, because they don't want his terms. So, and they want the devil. And so, inserting into blood, because it's like in the Spirit, when Paul says the angels don't always know male and female because it's like auras and things like that, but when we're head covering, it helps. Things like that. Jacob and Esau, Jacob's able to spiritually can confuse the issue just by being like more serious about it or something. That's the same thing about like there's a protection an unbeliever gets by having a partner that is a believer, right? Either in spirit, or because like it never says you have to like get married in a church or whatever, but like that's God honors that. But like the actual consummation of the marriage is kind of a real big deal. I know no one wants to hear that, and sorry that it is that way, but like that's why people cut soul ties. Anyway, so this is like a Game of Thrones thing, right? But like they believe it, these things, and more than you would think, and more than groups than I can list here. So that's where these, because they don't really have, like they should already be under judgment, right? They've done enough stuff to where God would have already jumped in a long time ago. But if they can insert themselves into the whatever, they believe, right? I'm not even like endorsing half this stuff. I'm just like processing, right? This is what they believe, and where these scriptures actually kind of make more sense once you kind of see what's actually going on in the Spirit, allegedly, is that there's a covering, kind of like Paul says with the unbeliever. I should have had the scripture in here, that they inherit by being, whatever it is, like associated or in covenant with this person that they replace, or whatever it is, into that bloodline. And so they do a lot of systematic stuff to turn people against each other to get that person like out of fellowship with anybody that could support them. Because, can we just do this? Let me see here. We'll go back to that. This is the one I really want to talk about. So 1943 is kind of a big thing. All this stuff happened in 43, where Philadelphia experience. Crowley finished the Book of the Law. There's this new Aeon philosophy. Old ritualistic occultism designed to manipulate mass consciousness, and so that framed a lot of different things. Whatever. I would not necessarily ever advocate reading Crowley or any kind of stuff like that. Like, it's enough to just like Google it and just understand the concept. But what I'm saying is, so that's the spiritual strategy, from more intense, focused, going after, kind of like the Holocaust, but different. Okay, so we have television enable some of these things. There's the worship of the individual will, and this follow the surge, and all these things. And then we have these four main sins at the end of the age. So we'll know at the end times if everybody's doing a lot of like murder, like it's like okay to kill Christians type thing. Anger and vengeance, but is kind of part of that too, though. But sexual immorality, sorcery, which is real sorcery, like spells, and then like the other kind that's like emotional manipulation and lying is a kind of a form of sorcery, and inheritance theft. So there's a universal law, right? And this has like been really helpful to understand some things about, and also about who you can trust, right? Especially if you're still kind of getting your spiritual sight back. And it has to do with what's called the revelation of the method. Okay, and do I have it in there? No, I have it in syllabus. I'll copy and paste it over. And so what that means is, for them to do like serious black magic on somebody, they have to disclose that they're going to do it. When it's on a governmental level, that can just be like literally a movie. If you've seen whatever, there's a John Grisham novel, Morning of COVID, and Move On and all that, that Frank Zappa disclosed that it could be done as well, and whether it was like China or Russia behind those, or both, was in both Zappa and Grisham, things like that. But and so a lot of stuff is on a global level done the same way as it is on the local level. So if a person is doing this, right, they begin to, how do I say this? They'll just recommend the movie to you with a hint, and especially if you like watch it and affirm it, or I don't know what degree or level they think they get consent, because especially these people, they're more in touch with the demonic kind of things, or maybe even have taken oaths to certain demons for powers and whatever. So they're trying to manufacture your consent, and so if the movie is some kind of witchcraft, especially the horror ones or things like that, if you think of a matrix and black magic as like you're having covenant with somebody and you're agreeing on things, it's like they are taking that as your consent to almost birth that in your reality. And if it's happened to Galatians a little bit, not with the movie obviously, but like when they started to like lose their way a little bit, they'd be like, or Paul would be like, who has bewitched you? Like he could see that something had happened to somebody in Bewitched where they had been some kind of demonic elements or some part of their person or whatever it is had been affected. But then you see, like, he's experiencing it himself in Romans 7, when he's like, I do the things I don't want to do, and that's usually the same kind of thing. A lot of times it can be losing your passion for something that you're meant to do, and then somebody else starts taking that up in your spot or whatever. That's a destiny swap. That's all over the Bible. It's a destiny swaps. Lucifer does it to Adam. Again, it's just somebody trying to dress up in your armor and take your spot, and pull heaven with your anointing and your boost. I mean, it's not. There's still an element of talent, response, things like that, but it's you'd be surprised how much the favor of the Lord and there's like the favor of the Lord and there's luck. Luck, I think, has more to do with Lucifer, but I think intent, when you say it, that's mean more, but I've been saying favor more. But if you just think of it really helps to see the Matrix this kind of way, and then that's how a lot of these witches kind of see it, and that's why it's kind of in vogue right now to see that kind of way. It's a little bit more disclosure, and the technology that's been there already on the demonic side, they're now like disclosing, and then whatever, I don't know. People say that obviously there's the Nephilim in the Bible during the days of Noah, and then Jesus goes on to say, oh yeah, so there's the end time is going to be like the days of Noah, and so, wait, what? And so what the sort of tech might be on that side too is, again, wouldn't have been disclosed necessarily. That might be hard to receive, but again, this is under what I feel like is do not be ignorant of the devil's schemes. Okay, I probably should have let off with that. But again, test every spirit, 1 John 4:1. But again, we want to renounce these agreements with darkness, and we want to decree heaven's reality to the earth. And that is what we're doing, is like, and you don't have to get the words exactly right. It's about intention. It's just like, oh, I did that, and I've seen that, and I feel like it's this. The Lord, I would renounce that. The Lord would rebuke that attempt. So if you hear, oh, they're trying, someone's trying to get you to watch that movie, it's disclosing that they're doing, XT or whatever. It's like, I rebuke that attempt. And so that actually breaks the contract right then, and they can't do it, right? There may be also, because some of this chosen stuff, if you look at all the stuff at the, Micah 7, the man's enemies will be those of his own household, But again, it also says, believe in your whole household will be saved. So which one are you praying and declaring and focusing on, right? It's not a part of it. But again, it's like you have to be led by the Lord and discerned by the Spirit, and there's a difference between praying with somebody and then letting them make food or whatever. And so there's covenant and fellowship and access are significant. So it's just such an hour for discernment, but the Lord is such a great leader. Just believe that like he's so much a better leader than you are a follower. Like, it may be a great follower, but like if you struggle with believing in your ability to do that, so renounce these agreements of darkness. There's a good example here. It's whatever it is. It's like, I renounce any false narrative, any symbolic deception, any spiritual agreement made outside of your sovereign will. That's massive. You should already be doing the one where I talk about all the time. I take my power back from anybody or any force that I sowed it into that was not for the will of the Lord. And that does a ton, right? That's that they're horrified that you'll do that. And there's like I sever connection to anything that's draining for me. Because a lot of stuff is like draining, these kind of things. But your words have a lot of power. So they want you to feel a symptom and claim a sickness, and so don't do that. There's just so much. Our kingdom is not of this world. With that famous quote, you don't even go here. That's how they feel. And especially if you start to awaken to this stuff and take back your power, and you stop to like sow your agreement and influence into the Babylon system, realizing that it needs you to stay alive, especially the more of a calling you have and the more spiritual inheritance and these kind of things. There are literal Jacob and Esau moments that you may not even known about. They don't tell you this stuff very clearly at all. They are so underhanded with it. And so already your friends trying to watch horror movies are on notice. And then what are the big ones, just see, I don't want you to watch them, so I don't want to say them, but almost like, there's just Yeah, I think it's enough to say whore. Okay, so again, they want you to get you out of Matthew 9:15. If you start mourning for the bridegroom in Matthew 9:15, and then Revelation 22, crying out for him to return, 2 Peter 3, he actually will come back and then put the devil in the pit and bring heaven to earth. And they don't want you to believe that. And so all of this stuff is really kind of orchestrated on getting you to like it here without him. So they don't get judged. And you don't get back everything that's been taken from you. Although, that sometimes that stuff comes back to you in part, because you need that resources to even build the house of prayer to whatever degree that you're meant to do that. Things like that. Start to take back your power and use it for the things of the Lord. Start to get these ideas that like Joseph had for the kingdom that everybody wanted. All of these things. But again, they're going to want to know about those and they were trying to steal your ideas and keep you from having them, and then now that took your power back, now they're trying to do it. Are trying to be your best friend or something. But again, also like they can't help it themselves, but like sabotaging and their mask coming off usually. But the thing is, what can be interesting is like if they're supposed to give you escape doors, right? God said He'd always give you a way out, right? And so they're almost compelled to do it, but they do the bare minimum. Or here's the trick they've been doing, exposing plain to the enemy. If you take your power back, or just like things get shaken up, or you just keep waking up a little bit too much, and or you start to seem like you actually got a bit of a spirit of revelation, and like you are breaking out, or maybe you're prophesied as one who will be the breakout or whatever, and they're thinking like they should hedge a little bit. They can disclose the plots or the plans of the other ones, and then give you a way out from theirs if you get out of the other ones. And so they're all betraying each other, exposing the other ones, but some of them do the false flag, which is tricky. But yeah, I don't know. A lot of times it can just be that the Lord will give you a clue that didn't come from any of them, and then that's the way out or something like that. Like, I don't know. It's interesting. But you may have found, just like, again, trusting in His leadership, and a lot of times it's just getting sovereign control over your life, and it could mean that it's just you for a bit. And then you build your soul family, right? Because what Jesus did that. Jesus is like, they're like, here's your mom's here. And he's like, who are my mother and my brother? Those who are doing the will of my Father. That's Mary, mother of God, that he's saying that about. So it's not a knock on her. It's just like, it can be that like, if you aren't ascended up where he's at, you might be low enough to where, like Judas, an entity can come in and use your unhealed shadow work to try to take you down. Right, and so that's again why we forgive them for what they do, but we ain't going down like that. Like we might have to be the bad guy, and you can call it codependency. A lot of times there's even better reasons than codependency. Everybody wants to do that because it's usually that, but either way, a lot of times it's just getting close to the Lord and beholding Him. Right, so. There's a good little activation prayer at the end there. There's a lot more to get through. I have tons of notes that I've been going through, but I'm trying to think. So sometimes it can be the movie, right, of the revelation of the method of like what they're doing to you or what they plan to do you. To breadcrumb a trail out, right? But so we're talking about the spirits behind these people too, because like they can actually be working against you, and also they slander the others, follow me, but then like that they gave you that way out, but then this other person sabotaged that way out, or this person says I'm gonna do help and I'm gonna be on the good side, but then like they're getting framed, but there's something about the consent that they can't just like flat out tell you what's happening, and it's complicated. But another way that it can be is that do some analysis on maybe, and it's. Have you seen the Ocean's 11 thing where, I'm not saying to watch it because I haven't really thought about the content of that, but there's a scene there where they're talking in a coded language, and so they're saying stuff, and it just sounds like you have no idea what they're talking about. And then there's Matt Damon like, oh, it's my turn. And then he like quotes Zeppelin or something like that. And then they make fun of him, like, you just said something bad. Well, I think they were just messing with him or whatever, because he didn't have the spiritual discernment to know how to do that, right? But again, I wouldn't engage in that too, because like, if you probably don't know what you're saying necessarily, but if you can do it to the degree that you can at least get them to say what they're saying or whatever, that can be part of it. I think it was that movie The Prestige. I think that was one that was the early used. Don't watch that. But point it, because, and again, when this was happening for years, I did not even know that this was like, I would see the movie and then like elements of the movie I would then experience or something, but because they were doing whatever darkness behind it to happen, and I'm kind of a special case. Anyway, and again, this is for entertainment purposes, right? So don't get weird with this information. But if you know, you know. So what they can do though is in this sort of exchanges of like either those coded statements or like, which is like kind of a jokey way. It'd be more. It wouldn't be quite that like sound so coded or whatever. It'd just be like analyzing certain maybe celebrities that maybe are similar to your situation, and then it might sound a little bit even more like your situation than it does the celebrity, and it might sound like even kind of justifying some kind of bad behavior, right? And that will, if it's not witchcraft, if they're just doing that because they are, or they just like, they just flat out do it. They know about what they think is karma, which is like Galatians 6:8, and so they want to be able at the judgment seat to say, "Well, I gave them a way out, or I told them what I was doing, and they went for it anyway. I think they wanted it." And they may have actually been doing black magic on you to get you to want it also, or to like abandon yourself enough to say yes to it. And you might be like, say no to it, and then they ghost you, and you're like, then you're all like, then they're doing magic on you because they did that. They want you to feel bad about it or whatever. But like, you shut them down. Like, that was a victory. Like, you said no, and then they're like, well, I don't know, if I can't do that, I'm not, they're not, that's like, they don't love you or whatever it is. They don't, whatever it is, that they weren't in it to, they're a taker, they're not a giver, unless it's like the strings, or some kind of weird agreement. They do, the gifts are a big part of this. Again, your power is stronger. I say the stuff so that like to how not to engage with stuff or whatever, and to see the red flags. But yeah, this is just aimed at like knowing the strategy of the enemy. But the more you have confidence in your power and see how awesome you really are, right? There's a little healthy self-centeredness. There's a little healthy spiritual ambition, but it's meant to like knowing Him more, because that's the currency of the hour, isn't as much money as it is knowing Him and asking for your delight to be in His Word, your love to be for Him, and to experience His love for you. Ephesians 1, 1 John, we love because He loved us first. And you start to like cut off these other energies, you have all the magic's off of you, and then you start to like be in covenant with Him, and then you start to attract the people that are meant to be your soul family, because you don't have magic all over you in spirit, and you aren't, and then a lot of times it is darkness and things like that they're trying to throw at you or something. But like, be careful. Okay, most important Bible verse ever is like, there's so many of those, but take heed what you hear, because by the measure that you use, it will be used back towards you. And that's just like, that's what they've been chipping away at, is to see yourself small, your prayer small, to believe that God's delays are because like they're engineering a lot of those delays because they know how to do that by cutting them off and not giving them energy. Then like those delays, and we're in an hour or two where the veil has been lifted, and like we've seen all this stuff exposed, with from Diddy to whatever, Weinstein and all. It's just like, not that all of those I mean, those were legit. Some things were set up in smear campaigns. Again, it's discernment. It's definitely an hour of like Solomon and like I don't know. It's we'll cut the baby in half. Oh no, and then one thing like intercedes for the baby too. I think is something about that. There's little tests or something like that. But you would be surprised the extent that what they do to. There's rejoicing in the Bible says there's rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents, and having a confirmation word like out of nowhere, just because of something like that of a friend who repented, and it's like that's real, like because there's so much on the enemy side too of going after each one of these, and everybody's got these massive calls, and you'd be surprised at like what somebody looks like in the natural versus like what they look like in the spirit and what they're called to do. And that kind of thing. So, but again, that's how a lot of times that's how they've gotten to disqualify. But you imagine too, like you get some people out and like start to look better, you get her sick less, the things start to go better for you, and it's because that's what happened to Joseph. He had the Midas touch coming out of that dungeon, and they were all living on his inheritance and all that stuff while he was in there. Never thought he'd get out. But what they at 1 Kings 1, apologize and ask for forgiveness and stop gaslighting, which is emotional abuse, then he brought them on the team. So yeah, just like the way that they've been able to use like psychic power to like see things you're supposed to do and then like find ways to delay them has been remarkable. So and I mean not you personally, but like some of these chosen ones like that. So, but again, just like decreeing it, rebuking that, just saying like, yeah, no one can rebuke my blessings and my timelines. Everything is happening for me exactly as God wills it. Lord rebuke any delays, things like that. Just however you want to word it, but the more you believe it, the more it's going to be powerful. So, so here, that's a good break in some of these concepts. That'll be a good foundation for getting more into the details of Babylon. I did say I'd go back up to this to kind of just break down a little bit of, there's the timeline usurper, because there's the highest timeline of where you do God's full will, right? And all of these saboteurs that when Jesus said, brother will betray, father, or the man's enemies, his own household, stuff like that. Job's wife, Michael and David, all these things. It's the Delilahs going after the Samsons, right? So, wow. But they invert all this stuff too. It's wild. So, yes, everything, a lot of stuff is really kind of an illusion or whatever. It's all about the age to come versus this age. But like how we carry out this age in Matthew 5:19, and which is like the lifestyle of obedience to God and prayer, and living by faith, living like in the spirit kind of thing, but still stewarding what's in the natural, and starting to just pray things, knowing that they're going to happen and decree them. It really is massive. It's it's like, wow, with the amount of inheritance you have, like you really should have accomplished a lot more. But what happened? And it's like they systematically made people Esau's in this country, with real intention and participation with real demons and sacrifices and sex rituals and just all kinds of stuff. Like you would, I don't know, but like I'm not like speaking that over you or anything like that. This is spiritual awareness, and if you got this channel, you probably know how these things all kind of look. This is filling in a lot of gaps, I think, between two worlds, essentially. And I've got so many more notes to fill in, so many more gaps. So more to come on that. Please do like and subscribe. Let's get this message out to set people free. And I will see you in the next one.